Welcome back to Occult Archives, listeners. We spend a lot of time here peeling back the layers of history's most, well, let's be honest, sometimes downright spooky books.
Right. Mystical grimoires, ancient secrets, all that good stuff. But we're not about just freaking people out, are we?
Definitely not. We're about taking these complex, often intimidating ideas and making them, well, understandable.
Accessible, even. Finding those moments of genuine wonder, right? Like cracking a code that's been hidden for centuries.
Exactly. And for episode 111, we're diving deep into a book that, at first glance, might seem a little out there, even for us. The Secret Science Behind Miracles, Unlocking the Ancient Hawaiian Huna for Healing, Magic, and Transformation.
By Max Freedom Long. A mouthful, I know, but trust me, this book is anything but your typical dusty old tome. It's a deep dive into the ancient Hawaiian Huna system, as researched and documented by Long.
So think of us as your guides on this adventure through Huna. We'll be uncovering the core principles, the real meat of what the kahunas, the keepers of the secret, believed about the nature of miracles, healing, even magic.
Exactly, and we'll be doing it in a way that's, well, digestible. You won't need a PhD in ancient Polynesian mysticism to follow along.
That's right. We're cutting through the complexity to deliver those aha moments, those surprising insights that make you go, huh, never thought of it that way.
So to set the stage, Long's work isn't just about stories or myths. He approaches this with a Western mindset, attempting to find a logical framework for what often appears, well, impossible.
Right, he dives into these first-hand accounts of firewalking, instantaneous healing, even people influencing the elements, and he tries to connect them to a coherent system.
Which, for a guy steeped in psychology and comparative religion, must have been quite a challenge.
It was. Long talks about arriving in Hawaii in 1917, immediately drawn to these kahunas, these mysterious figures shrouded in secrecy.
And it wasn't just a cultural thing. Due to the influence of Christian missionaries, the kahuna traditions were actually outlawed. So any knowledge of Huna was being passed down very, very discreetly.
Imagine trying to pry those secrets out. It's no wonder Long was intrigued. He mentions these initial rejections, how people would brush off his inquiries as black superstition, but then he would hear these incredible stories, these accounts of spirits, deities, even the volcano goddess Pele making appearances.
Classic forbidden knowledge situation.
Yeah.
And Long, being who he was, he didn't back down. He was drawn to these stories, not just at face value, but looking for the underlying system, the logic beneath them.
And that led him to the work of Dr. William Tufts Brigham, curator of the Bishop Museum in Honolulu. Brigham has spent a whopping 40 years studying kahuna magic, particularly their healing rituals and their cosmology.
A solid foundation for Long to build on. And after Brigham passed away, Long kind of picked up the torch, carrying on this urgent mission to document this fading knowledge before it was lost forever.
It was during this time that Long had a major realization. He figured, hey, for these kahunas to have passed down this knowledge for generations, they must have had specific terms for these elements of their magic in the Hawaiian language.
So simple, yet brilliant. But then the question becomes, why hadn't anyone really explored this linguistic angle before?
Because, as Long discovered, there was a big problem. The existing Hawaiian English dictionaries, many compiled by early missionaries, just didn't accurately translate the nuances of the kahuna concepts. They lacked the cultural understanding, so any prior translations were likely way off.
A classic case of lost in translation, but with potentially significant consequences when it comes to understanding a whole system of knowledge.
And this is where Long really shines. He decides to dig into the root meanings of the Hawaiian language, believing it holds the key to unlocking the true understanding of Huna.
So, armed with this linguistic tool, he starts exploring those three essential components that Brigham had identified as core to Huna.
The first being a form of consciousness.
And this is where things get interesting. The kahunas weren't talking about one single soul or mind. They believed in a triune self, three distinct aspects of spirit within each person.
Starting with the unihipili, often interpreted as the subconscious. Long meticulously examines the root words associated with this term. And it's amazing how much it aligns with our modern understanding of the subconscious mind.
It really is. Like the fact that it's described as grieving, silent, hidden, accompanying, sticky, careful, even stubborn.
And don't forget, fearful.
Right. It holds memories, operates irrationally, can be influenced by suggestion. Sounds pretty familiar, right?
Almost like they had a word for Freud back then.
Right. And then there's that connection to dripping water as a symbol of vital force, which gives us a hint about its energetic nature.
Then we have the ulani, the conscious spirit.
And the root, Unos means speaking, right?
Mm.
Highlighting its communicative, more human-like aspect. But the kahunas saw it as a less powerful spirit, almost like a shadow linked to the deceased.
Interesting. So it relied on the unihippoly, the subconscious, for its memories.
Right, which is something we can all relate to, right? That feeling of a memory being just out of reach until suddenly, boom, it surfaces.
Exactly. But the Yuhon wasn't powerless. The kahunas believed it had a strong will, almost like a hypnotic force, and it was capable of inductive reasoning. That higher level thinking that makes humans, well, human.
So you have this fascinating dynamic, the subconscious with its raw emotions and experiences, and the conscious mind with its logic and directed intention. They work together, but not always harmoniously.
And then there's the third spirit, the Amakua, the big kahuna of the bunch, so to speak,
Mhm.
often interpreted as the superconscious or the parental spirit.
Considered the oldest, the wisest, the most trustworthy aspect of the self. And interestingly, it was seen as the dual male-female spirit.
And unlike many traditional deities, the kahuna's relationship with the Amakua wasn't about fear or subservience, but one of love and deep trust, like a parent and child. They believed the Omakua would even intervene with even higher spiritual beings if necessary.
A protector, a guide on the spiritual journey, very different from the image of a wrathful god demanding obedience.
So we've got our triune consciousness as our base, right? Now, let's move on to the next essential element, the force behind all this magic, and that's where mana comes in.
Which Long compares to vital energy, even suggesting it could be something akin to electricity or magnetism.
It was the essence of life itself, intimately connected to all our thought processes and how our bodies function.
And, the symbol the kahunas used for mana, water.
Which makes so much sense when you think about it. Water flows, it fills, it can be contained, it can dissipate. It's dynamic, just like this vital force.
Brigham, in his research, even documented kahunas charging wooden sticks with what appeared to be bodily electricity.
They used these charged sticks in battles, and supposedly they delivered a nasty shock upon contact. Sounds a bit like some practices found in Native American traditions.
Right, the parallels are pretty intriguing.
And just as they have three aspects of consciousness, the kahunas also recognize three different levels of mana, three different intensities.
Like different voltages of electricity.
Exactly. You've got the base level mana, the lower intensity that the subconscious uses. Then there's mana, which is a step up in intensity, and the conscious mind uses it for things like willpower or even hypnosis.
And finally, the big daddy of them all, mana loa.
The highest intensity, believed to be the exclusive domain of the superconscious.
And it's fascinating, right? Because even modern science has discovered these low-level electrical activities in our body tissues and higher levels in the brain when we think.
Right. So while we might not fully understand Mauna Loa yet, the idea that there are different levels of vital energy within us, well, it's not as far-fetched as it might initially seem.
And now we come to the third essential component of Huna, the invisible substance that acts as a sort of bridge between consciousness and this vital force.
And that's where Aka comes in, which Long translates as shadowy body stuff. The kahunas believe that each of the three spirits, the Unihipli, Uhain, and Amakua, had a corresponding Aka body.
Like an invisible counterpart, a blueprint. And Long points out that the term kino, aka, literally meaning shadowy body or halo, had some really interesting parallels in ancient Greek and Egyptian thought too.
And these weren't just symbolic ideas, they were considered actual structures, just, invisible to our ordinary senses.
So let's break down the characteristics of each Okuwa body, shall we?
Let's. Starting with the subconscious's Akuo body, it was thought to be the most dense and importantly sticky.
Sticky? What do you mean by that?
Well, Long describes it as the reason why we might feel a connection to certain places or objects even after we've left them, like an invisible thread or residue.
Ah, like an energetic imprint. I can see that.
Right. It's also seen as the template for every cell in our physical body.
Interesting. So it's the blueprint for our physical form and a conduit for that base level mana.
Exactly. And when it's charged with mana, this Okuo body can even become rigid, almost like a physical hand.
So this stickiness isn't just a passive connection. The kahunas believe that these shadowy threads could be manipulated for their magic, or explain those strong emotional attachments we sometimes have to places or people. Makes you think twice about cleaning out that attic, huh?
Ah, right. Now, the conscious spirit's Aka body, that was considered less dense and not sticky at all. It might conduct the base level mana, but it definitely conducted its own mid-level mana, the mana, which it used for thinking and willpower.
And this Aka body, they believed, was the one that persisted after death, our ethereal, ghostly form.
And last but not least, the superconscious's Aka body, which was the lightest and most subtle of the three. It was believed to house the Amakua, and it rarely interacted directly with the physical body.
So we have these three Aka bodies corresponding to the three spirits, each with its own density and relationship to the flow of mana.
Right, and then there's the concept of Aka threads, which are like extensions of these shadowy bodies. They facilitate the flow of mana between people and places, even between people and spirits.
Sort of like the astral cords described in other esoteric traditions.
Mhm.
And even our thoughts themselves were believed to have shadowy bodies, thought forms, which played a big role in their magic.
So you start to see how this interconnected web of the three spirits, their shadowy bodies, and the flow of mana through these Akko threads formed the basis for how the kahunas believed magic worked. And this is where Long starts diving into specific examples.
Right. He wants to show us how this all played out in practice. And he starts with a pretty intense example, the death prayer.
Right. This was a ritual where the kahunas believed they could use enslaved, ghostly subconscious spirits charged with mana to harm someone.
Essentially, they'd empower these spirits, often using a personal item belonging to the victim, and direct them to enter the person's body and gradually drain their life force.
And the cases Long describes are pretty chilling, like the story of the Irishman who angered a Hawaiian elder, or the sugar plantation manager.
And what's striking is that the victims weren't necessarily aware of being targeted. So it challenges the idea that fear or superstition was the sole cause of their misfortune. They might have been completely oblivious to this spiritual attack happening.
Right, and Long even records the incantation used, "O Lono, listen to my voice."
It's pretty eerie when you think about it.
And then the stories about the poltergeist activities that supposedly followed a successful death prayer, as those spirits, I guess, played around with the residual energy.
Okay, I'm officially spooked now. Let's talk about something more uplifting, like instantaneous healing.
Okay, good idea. So the kahunas believe that the high self, using that high-voltage manaloa, could dissolve injured tissue into a kind of ectoplasm.
But because the subconscious's shadowy body, the blueprint, remained intact, the high self could then reform this ectoplasmic material back into its perfect, healthy state.
Like a spiritual 3D printer. Incredible.
Right. But the key, according to them, was clearing out what they called complexes.
Those fixed negative beliefs that we hold in our subconscious. They saw these complexes as blockages, almost like a constant internal struggle that prevented the flow of mana and hindered healing.
It's interesting to think about this idea of complexes through a modern lens. We all have those stubborn negative beliefs, those limiting thought patterns that we struggle with. Could the kahunas be onto something here? Is there a connection between our beliefs and our well-being?
It's definitely something to ponder. Now, Long also talks about more familiar practices like Loma Lomi massage and the laying on of hands, which were understood through this Huna lens as well.
Right. The kahunas believed that touch could transfer vital force, carrying with it healing thought forms. And they emphasize the importance of physical stimuli, like water or massage, to make suggestions more effective for the subconscious.
They weren't just working with the spiritual, they were incorporating the physical too. Although they also believe some kahunas used herbal remedies as well.
So a multifaceted approach to healing. Interesting.
And then there's the claim of raising the dead, which, let's be honest, is pretty hard to swallow.
Yeah, that's pushing the boundaries even for us. But Long makes a distinction between permanent restoration and temporary revitalization.
Right. He describes a case where a kahuna seemingly revived a drowned boy.
And how do they explain that?
Well, it supposedly involved the help of spirit helpers, warming the body, applying vital force, using verbal suggestions, and of course, invoking the high self. They weren't necessarily bringing people back from the dead, but restoring life to a body where the connection to the spirits hadn't been completely severed.
So more like jump-starting a stalled engine than, Frankenstein stuff.
Right, and then things get even wilder when we get to the kahuna's supposed ability to influence natural phenomena.
Talk about playing God. Long touches on controlling winds, even preventing shark attacks. But the specifics are scarce, probably due to the secrecy surrounding these practices.
Right. They believed they could contact spirits through the high self to influence the elements. Imagine that, having a direct line to the forces of nature.
The claim about preventing shark attacks in Hawaiian waters is a particularly intriguing one. I mean, If true, that's some serious mojo.
And then there's telepathy and psychometry, which they also had theories about. They believed the subconscious could project an Ica thread to connect with another person's subconscious, allowing them to transfer thought forms using that low-level mana.
So they had a model for how telepathic communication might work. Long even cites examples like Kudabux, who seemingly projected his senses through his shadowy body.
Yeah, those cases are pretty mind-blowing.
They are. And this brings us to a really important aspect of the Huna system, which is the significance of those complexes we talked about earlier.
Those ingrained beliefs in the subconscious.
Right, and how the kahunas went about treating them.
They believed they were the root cause of a whole host of problems, both physical and mental. And their method was pretty intense.
Oh, so.
They'd deliver a powerful shock of that low-level vital force to the person, combined with a suggestion that directly contradicted the limiting belief.
So it was like a spiritual shock therapy.
In a way, yes. And Long describes some fascinating cases, like the Hawaiian driver who was burdened with guilt and as a result developed physical ailments. And then there's the man whose beard mysteriously stopped growing after someone suggested it would.
Wow. So they were essentially trying to reprogram the subconscious mind through this combination of energy and suggestion.
Exactly. And they also recognized the concept of spirit attacks and obsession, where a guilt complex could make someone more vulnerable to negative spiritual influences.
Which is pretty unsettling when you think about it.
It is. And they even had a practice of grumbling to departed relatives for redress.
Grumbling. What do you mean by that?
It was a way of addressing perceived injustices from the spirit world. It's kind of like how we might pray for forgiveness or guidance.
Interesting. So they had their own ways of dealing with what they perceived as spiritual imbalances. And Long even draws a parallel to exorcism.
Right. And ultimately, the kahunas believed that true miracles, those instantaneous healings, were performed by the high self using that most powerful manaloa.
And their understanding of faith went beyond just conscious belief. It required the alignment of the low self, the subconscious as well.
Right, because those deeply ingrained complexes, those negative beliefs, could actually block the high self's ability to intervene.
That's a powerful idea. It's not just about believing in something intellectually, but also having your deeper self on board.
Exactly. And Long tells this amazing story about an elevator operator who had a spontaneous healing after a direct encounter with what he called a higher intelligence.
A direct connection with the high self, leading to healing without any rituals or external intervention. Pretty remarkable.
It is. So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's recap what we've learned.
We've explored the Huna concept of the triune self, with its unihippoly, uthan, and omakua, each with its own distinct role and function.
Right. And then there are the three intensities of vital force, mana, mana, and manaloa, and how those are connected to the different aspects of consciousness.
And let's not forget the three shadowy bodies, the aka, and their role in conducting mana and forming connections between us and the world, and even between us and the spirit world.
It's amazing how these interconnected triad spirits, forces, and bodies form the foundation of the Huna system, explaining their ideas about healing, magic, and what we often call miracles.
And isn't it fascinating how some of these ancient kahuna ideas resonate with modern psychology and even parapsychology?
It really is. Like their understanding of the subconscious, the concept of vital life force, the power of suggestion. These ideas were surprisingly ahead of their time.
And, thinking about Long's description of the unihippoly as sticky, how it holds on to experiences, it's almost like a poetic way of describing how our subconscious minds encode memories and attach emotions to them.
It's like they had a different language, a different metaphor for describing the same phenomena that we're still grappling with today.
Exactly. And as always, this deep dive probably leaves you with more questions than answers. What were the specifics of their rituals? What is the true nature of the high self? How can we apply these principles in our lives today? These are all valid questions, and I encourage you to keep exploring, to keep digging.
Because maybe, just maybe, the secret science behind miracles isn't just about understanding these invisible forces. Maybe it's about cultivating a relationship of love and trust with our own inner wisdom, our own parental spirit.
Food for thought, right?
Mm.
Who knows what we might unlock within ourselves if we start listening to that inner voice.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap things up for today.
Until next time, listeners, keep exploring those hidden corners of knowledge. You never know what wonders you might uncover.
And who knows, maybe you'll even discover your own secret science along the way.